The following program has been pre-recorded, so please don't call in at this time. If you wish to participate in the program, tune in at 5 p.m. every Wednesday for A Pause for Thought on Baton Rouge Community Radio. Good evening, fellow humans. This is Wayne Parker with A Pause for Thought, coming to you on 96.9 FM, Baton Rouge Community Radio, here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Good evening, everyone. Glad to have you here. I hope you're glad to be here, too. Tonight's topic is how close are we to our animal nature and how easily can we reach it? And if you have an opinion about that particular subject or a question about what we're talking about here, feel free to call in 343-9927, 343-9927. If you're outside the area or live streaming on WHYR.org, feel free to call in by dialing the area code 225-32 or 343-9927. Almost gave them out my home phone number. Anyway, I said talk to us, and what I meant was Lang Baker's in the studio tonight. Good evening, Lang.
Hi, Wayne.
Hey, Lang. Well, we talked about this topic a ways back when I told you about it, and before I start off with my brief starting off material, I wanted to mention, as I told you last night too, the original impetus for me having this subject was somewhat glib in retrospect, but just like anything else, when I began looking into it more and thinking about it more, it really is an involved subject. So we hopefully can have some fun with it anyway. I know that you've done some studies on the brain, but we're talking about here the man's animal nature, what makes man different from human, or humans different from animals, or what makes a human being, really. And I want to start off with a quote from Thoreau's Walden, but actually in Walden he quoted Mencius, who was, I just learned recently, a Chinese Confucian who lived in the 4th to 3rd centuries BCE, and he was the most famous Confucian besides Confucius, as I understand it. But Mencius made the statement, quote, "That in which men differ from brute beasts is a thing very inconsiderable. The common herd lose it very soon. Superior men preserve it carefully." And so there's some ancient guy from 2,200 years ago or so who observed the combination, so to speak, I guess. He observed that mankind are animals, but different. So I guess that's. And I guess, do we operate as animals today, Lang? Do you think we operate like animals?
Well, we are animals, so in reverse you could say, since we are animals, that's how we have to operate. I think what your quote was driving at is distinction between what level of animal behavior we practice.
Yeah, and I guess I look at our animal nature as the default nature, so to speak. What prompted me to get into this actually was not the quote from Thoreau, but a coworker and I were talking, and he shared with me an essay that somebody posted online recounting his experience as a 14-year-old boy going to Woodstock 1999 with his father. And he described everything he saw. And just like the original Woodstock from back when we were kids in the 70s, of course you were probably kids in the 60s, right? But anyway, similar to that, there was great music with lots of mud, lots of substance abuse, things like that. And he witnessed a lot of things that he just thought were bizarre. But the one that really got me on the idea to do this show is he stated here that there were so-called riots that were reported in the media that occurred at this concert, or this event. And earlier in his essay, he talked about how there were areas where there were just all of the porta potties were concentrated, And of course, as often happens in such places, they didn't empty them as fast as they should, so there was dirt and all kinds of stuff all around them and everything else. And he says here, now the stuff you probably want to hear about is the riots. If I remember correctly, he says, it started during this one particular band's set as a mudslinging fight near the toilet to the west of the stage. Literally just throwing mud. Oh, and feces. Yeah, the toilets hadn't been cleaned and there were piles of feces that people picked up and started flinging around. Well, some other people didn't appreciate this very much, and combined with the music being pumped out by the band, a fight broke out. It spread quickly into the area in front of the fires, blah, 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 everything got out of hand. But then he concludes the whole thing by stating, I learned a lot about life that weekend, stuff you can never learn in school. Mostly, though, I learned just how low humanity can stoop. In large enough groups, with enough drugs and hormones, we can literally be reduced to feces-flinging chimpanzees. I saw it there, and I hope I never have to see it again. And I think we've all heard the stories about the monkeys or chimpanzees in a zoo getting in a fight and throwing their feces at each other, and we all think it's ha funny, but here's an example of human beings doing the same thing. And my thought was, well, something reduced them to their animal, or to go back to their animal nature. What's your thought on that?
Well, that is one aspect. It's also been proposed, and some claim to have evidence to support the proposition that our positive emotions also are an expression of animal history and nature, and are shared with other animals. Darwin, I believe, in some of his works from his study of animals and humans, said that a lot of animals share the same emotions that man does, only in different degrees, varying according to the species.
I can believe that.
And the nurturing relationships that humans show for their young and for their community members are exhibited in other species as well. So that's an expression of our animal nature. If we want to look at our animal nature as being that springs from the emotionality part of our brain, as
well, I hadn't intended
contrasted to the rational.
Right. I hadn't intended to get to this. Oh, I didn't write that one down. I just remember it. I just checked online while I was waiting for you, a little bit on the brain. I Googled man's animal brain, I think it was. No, lizard brain is what I Googled. And this one essay I read pointed out, as I knew before, I don't know the name of that part of the brain, but there's the part of the brain that's at the very base of our skulls. It's at the tip of our spinal cords, or the brain stem, so to speak. And that is considered the reptilian brain, and it's responsible for, well, they just called them animal instincts, and then it said the layer of brain surrounding that dealt with many of the emotions. And then above that was more the human characteristics. So I'm guessing the emotions, and you're saying animals have emotions too. Maybe that's the transition between animal and human, at least the animal and human part of the brain. I don't know. What do you think on that? Have you read anything about that?
Well, here and there, and I don't have what you might call photographic memory, and I don't take a lot of notes. I just build impression on impression.
Yep.
I'm an impressionist in that sense. And my sense is what we're talking about is a continuum. There's not like a clear demarcation between what's animal and what's the higher functions of the brain. And so, I mean, there have been classifications of the reptilian brain and the mammalian brain and the higher reasoning portions of the brain, but I think, to me, it seems like species have evolved, and there's a carryover from one species to descendants that evolved additional parts of their brains. And so, of course, the elements that were there before don't necessarily disappear just because more is added on top. I remember hearing a lecture on the sense of disgust, and at the most basic level, it's like when an animal eats rotten food, there's this disgust response and
Right.
the food spit out. But the same part of the brain also shows activity when we have like emotional disgust. And so we use that word in both senses, in both understandings. And it's like the way this lecturer described it is that we don't go about creating new parts of the brain for the new functions. We adapt for dual use parts of the brains that were previously used in a more restricted way.
Yeah, okay. Just like, I guess, the higher, so-called higher portions or more developed parts of the brain develop out of the lower portions. That right there means they're connected directly with them and they receive inputs from them. And I guess those parts of the brain also send inputs back to the lower ones. So, yeah, there wouldn't be so much that only the lower emotions cue a response from your animal brain. It would be really all human traits. Anything on the higher level is going to be transmitted back to the lower level and turn into some kind of an attitude or response. That's what I'm guessing anyway. I don't really know, but
That makes sense to me from the stuff I've read and heard.
But what would differentiate between you and me sitting here talking on the radio and these people who were degenerated, so to speak, into feces-flinging chimpanzees at this Woodstock festival? Do you see yourself lowering down to that level sometime, or is it possible?
I don't see myself putting myself in a situation where those parts of my brain would be triggered, but I wouldn't say that my brain couldn't be triggered to go into that state given the appropriate inputs.
Yeah, and the appropriate precursors or the situation. Doggone it, that thought just blew away from me. But one thing I was thinking, well, yeah, that's what it was. I was thinking. You mentioned that your brain would go to that mode, or
My brain conceived of as an independent organ subject to the inputs that are given to it is capable of reacting the way any brain is.
Okay. I was just, I forget, the way you worded it made me wonder if you were, well, the point I was going to make was, and it was based on what I was thinking, which I can't remember exactly what you said now, but I got the impression, considering these people at the Woodstock Festival, that the so-called higher parts of their brain were subdued or shut down.
Well, I think certain physical inputs
Can do that, yes.
can do that.
Well, that's okay. But yeah, they maybe had too much alcohol or too many other mind-altering substances, and I think being in a mob also has an effect. I'm not sure what.
Yeah.
I can go ahead.
Well, as I recall, once it was explained to me, the term berserk refers to a rage state that warriors enter into as a unit, as a mob. What I'm recalling is that that's where the origin of that word is. I don't know if that's accurate or not.
Okay, I'd like to come back to that point on mobs. I'm saying that now so that you can remind me in case I lose the thought. You're listening to A Pause for Thought on Baton Rouge Community Radio. This is Wayne Parker with Lang Baker. And you feel free to call in with your comments and questions. We're discussing how close are we to our animal nature and how quickly can we reach it. And you can call in at 343-9927, 343-9927. If you're listening outside the calling area or live streaming on WHYR.org, just call the area code 225-343, doggone it, 9927. Getting back to mobs, Lang, when I was a young man one time, and I won't give details, but I found myself involved in a mob, an angry mob. I'm not sure if there are any other kinds, but I recall now, looking back on it as hopefully a more mature person, that I felt a lot of power knowing that I was part of this huge organism, so to speak, you know, and that the power fueled my own emotions and my own actions, and my own actions were reprehensible that night. But, you know, like I said, I'm not going to give details, although I think the statute of limitations has expired since then. This is back in the late 70s. But, yeah, I guess everything is connected, and it depends on the situations. I think we have a call coming in, but I'll give him a try. Good evening, WHYR.org, WHYR Baton Rouge Community Radio. This is A Pause for Thought. You're on the air. May I help you? Nope, I guess they're not there. Anyway, getting on to this next thing that I found, this guy here, his name was William Thesius. I don't know that he's anybody that's renowned or been peer-reviewed, but he's talking about the brain. And he says here, evil does not exist where there is no will. Well, he's talking about animals, you know, animal and human. Evil does not exist where there is no will. And then his second proposition is, all evil in the human family comes from man's animal nature. Man has three elements with which to forge his essence: animal nature, human nature, and will. And he basically says that will is what we use to decide which one we're going to, the animal or the human that we're going to use. And really, based on what you said before, I'm wondering if that's too simplistic.
I'm not sure I understand what he's referring to with will, unless he's talking about the rational brain.
Yeah, well, I guess he's saying here in his third proposition, man is human to the degree that he exercises his will to control his animal nature. And so, you know, I guess it takes will or it takes strength, but I guess you also have to be aware of yourself too. So
you'd have to have some concept of what is your animal nature if you're going to exert effort to
control it or ignore it, yeah.
To raise your human nature to above and to subordinate the animal nature. But my understanding of animal nature is different than that kind of a dichotomy.
Well, what's your understanding of animal nature then?
Well, any organism that's not a plant has an animal nature.
Oh, well,
so
yeah.
That's what I mean.
Okay, yeah.
And so, in a sense, what we call human nature is a part of the animal nature that not all animals possess, but it's still a part of the animal nature, not something in opposition to or distinct from.
Okay. I got a sneaky feeling that our phone isn't wired in here. So I'm going to have to try to give up on hearing the phone in the other office and trying to answer it. Getting back to the animal thing, you were saying we're all animals. I'm trying to recollect now. I was thinking that in order to be able to choose between animal and human, we have to have some standard, I guess, for the behavior. And wouldn't that require a society? I mean, if we were out in the woods all by ourselves, well, let's say so-called we were raised by wolves, you know, one of these children in the old stories that were raised by wolves, we would behave as they do and consider it normal, would we not? No idea, huh? Well, that's...
I don't know how a human would, if a human could survive, how a human would behave.
Well, yeah, that's true. I don't know if anybody really ever has been raised by wolves. I would doubt it, because wolves get hungry. But anyway, this one other essay that didn't have an author noted with it stated here that man is an animal whose social behavior evolved over millions of years to serve the survival and advantage of individuals and family groups in the natural environment. And I was kind of thinking about that when you were talking about how we are all animals, and in a sense we all behave as animals. But animals have, I guess, one of two responses, or three, I guess, to an aggressor. They can either run away, they can fight it, or they can submit to it. And I guess human beings have the same. Well, of course we have the same, but are we limited to those reactions to an aggressor? I don't think so. I'm just wondering. Sure, we can get away from somebody if they're, verbally abusive or physically abusive. We could certainly strike at them, or we can rise above them, so to speak, and just not care what they say or whatever, or be impervious to them. We don't necessarily have to submit to them. So don't we have other choices as human beings?
Well, I would think that we would, but I think we have other tools at our disposal. We have language. We can attempt to diffuse the situation through, talk down the person, or
Talk down, you mean not down
talk
to,
them down
but
from,
talk them down
talk
from
them
right,
down
yeah.
from their enraged state or their elevated state of hostility, or could attempt to distract them.
Yes.
So that their mind shifts into a different framework. So we have additional tools at our disposal.
Yeah, I guess that's what it is. We tend to think that a person that resorts immediately to violence as being more of an animal, so to speak, I guess because he either didn't have the self-control or didn't have the knowledge or understanding that there were other ways that would be less destructive to respond.
Or they were triggered by PTSD event or something.
Good point. And that there would be something they were conditioned to do, because oftentimes when something unexpected happened, they had to react forcefully. And so yeah, it's kind of that would be a reversion, I guess, and a reaction based on something that you've been conditioned to do, for which, or in response to which, there was no choice, there was no thoughtfulness involved. If you think someone's getting ready to throw a grenade at you or shoot you or something, you're not going to just ponder it and try to talk your way out of it. You've got to react. And I guess that's intense enough to where, you don't think. But in society, and of course those guys, people with PTSD like that affects them that way, it's tough for them to function in society for that reason, because we do look upon violence in response to most nonviolent assaults as inappropriate. But yeah, that is certainly, I don't want to say lower, but the violence, I would think, would be an animalistic response, or part of our animal nature.
I would tend to agree with that. And then, what would you think triggers road rage? And is that a...
Having experienced it myself in the past,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think isolation from the other drivers, because you're in your nice little comfortable vehicle, helps facilitate it. Lack of that fosters a lack of empathy, I guess, and maybe that's one of the problems too. Of course, lack of empathy for other people you don't know or have never associated with, is probably somewhere near one of the sources of most of humankind's problems. Really, I guess if you know how your actions or know how you would feel if you were impoverished, you might not be so inclined to look upon poor people with contempt or make presumptions about them. If you suffered from depression, you might not be inclined to call people who can't get motivated to do anything, lazy or bums or whatever. But, so road rage, I guess. I don't know. Road rage is... I could default to you. Jump in whenever you want to. But I'm pondering here. I don't want to leave too much, quiet silence on the air. But that's a tough one. What goes into that? I mean, obviously your pride is insulted because they cut you off or they did something. They disrespected you, I guess, is what gets you started. And...
Well, yeah, there's the question of what triggers it, and then there's also the question of what's actually going on in the brain when that happens. And there's some kind of... something gets triggered in the part of the emotional brain that responds that way. And there's probably an adrenaline rush that goes along with it, and which there usually is involved when there's an aggressive act.
Yes, I think I can recall that.
And so,
in my instance.
And adrenaline is, I guess, goes way back in the animal evolution as something that contributes to survival of the individual.
And that brings me back to another thing I was thinking of. Adrenaline is a chemical, which no doubt affects the brain. Hormones release certain chemicals. Certain hormones do release certain chemicals, and I'm thinking of the sex hormones for one thing. And the chemicals can change your picture of reality, your understanding of reality. Perhaps just like the alcohol or the drugs that these other people were doing at Woodstock, these chemicals suppress certain parts of the brain and bring you closer to your animal nature because that's where you're safest. That's the oldest and most reliable part of the brain, so to speak. It's not going to dither over what to do. It's just going to do what it needs to. Maybe that's what it is.
And certain chemicals heighten the sensitivity of certain parts of the brain as well. So if you've got a reduction of the activity in the prefrontal cortex or whatever is supposed to control your emotions or bring some sense of rationality into your decision making, if you've got a suppression of that and you've got a heightened reactivity in the level of the brain that's initiating a fight or flight response or an aggressive response.
Dangerous combination, yes.
Well, dangerous or not depends on the circumstances. It may be that it can lead the animal to act in a way that reduces the danger to it.
Yeah, and I guess in that sense, even you and I, who consider ourselves to be somewhat stable-minded and civilized and human people, if we were sick or if we had gone through a long ordeal and were feeling weak or whatever, and other factors came involved, we could be weakened enough and pushed to that point where we could react. And I'm sure we all have. I don't know about you. I can't speak for you, but when I have not been at my best in my health, I do not always respond well to challenges. I get impatient. I get cranky, and so there, I'm a perfect example of that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I think one common phrase about children is when they get cranky, they need some sleep.
Yeah?
There's some imbalance going on there that's being expressed through their being cranky.
Yeah, they've got something going on there, but, there could be any number of things with a baby, but we can't ask them questions normally. But
yeah.
I wonder if babies can communicate with each other. Anyway, we were out of time for tonight. I hope our phones are working properly. I know we had a couple of calls, but I couldn't answer them. But you've been listening to A Pause for Thought with Wayne Parker and tonight Lang Baker. And we've been discussing our animal nature and how easily we can reach it. Come back next week at 5 o'clock, and we'll have Louis Raines of the AFL-CIO here to talk about the relevance of labor unions in today's economy. This is Wayne Parker on A Pause for Thought on Baton Rouge Community Radio, 96.9 FM in Baton Rouge. Have a good evening.